God says, "My beloved soul, this message finds you in the quiet place where your heart rests after giving everything it had, and heaven itself has been watching you from there. Some loves are loud and easy to see, and then there are loves like yours, quiet, loyal, long-lasting, and so pure that even the unseen realms stopped to watch it. You loved your soulmate in a way that the world didn't teach you, but your soul did. You didn't love to have things, you loved to keep them safe. You didn't want to control, you wanted to know. You didn't love to get away from being alone. You loved because your spirit saw another spirit. That kind of love is not ignored, either on earth or in heaven. This is why the title of your journey is so important. Heaven was not shocked by how much you loved them, but by how much you respected yourself while loving them. My dear soul, you carried love with care, patience, and self-control. You knew when to be quiet, when to step back, when to give space, and when to just hold the energy of love without expecting anything in return. That isn't normal love. That is love that was chosen. A lot of people like it when things are easy, when they feel safe, or when they are praised. But you loved in silence. You loved while you waited. You loved in the dark, and you still chose to keep your dignity. Instead of giving into despair, heaven doesn't see love as words or promises. It sees love as being on the same page, and your alignment never broke, even when your heart was racing. That's why people who couldn't hear your name heard it. You were chosen not because your path was easy, but because your soul could handle depth without becoming bitter. You didn't get angry when people didn't understand you. You didn't get angry when you weren't picked right away. When people questioned your loyalty, you didn't try to get back at them. You chose grace, emotional maturity, and the quiet processing of your pain instead. My dear soul, that is very rare. Heaven doesn't care about loud suffering. It cares about quiet endurance, and your endurance held love without losing self-respect, which is something even angels study. You loved your soulmate without trying to change them to fit what you wanted. You saw them as they were, with their flaws, confusion, tears, and healing that wasn't quite done yet, and you still treated them kindly. You didn't rush their growth, make them feel bad for being late, or push them to wake up. You kept the space instead. Many people don't know what that kind of love feels like because it doesn't come with chains. It comes with freedom, and freedom can be scary for people who are still learning how to stay. But you didn't stop loving them just because they didn't understand it completely. You let it be without any rules while still keeping your own inner balance. Heaven saw how you never gave up on yourself. My dear soul, you listened to your gut when it told you to stop, even though you loved deeply. You kept your boundaries even when your heart wanted to break them. You left situations that would have made you feel bad about yourself. You chose not to argue, to pray instead of reacting, and to have faith instead of fear. That's why your love became a witness. Not everyone is chosen to love like that because it takes strength, not weakness. To love like that, you have to know who you are and not lose yourself in someone else. There were nights when you had conversations in your head that you never said out loud. Nights when you asked the universe questions you never expected to get answers to. Nights when you let go of control and trusted the timing instead. Those prayers that weren't spoken were heard by heaven. Heaven saw that you didn't want to own anything, but to be in line with it. You didn't ask them to pick you. You wanted the truth. You asked what it meant. You wanted things to be clear, even if that meant letting go. My dear soul, that one request sets you apart from many. You didn't care about the outcome. You cared about doing the right thing. You loved your soulmate in a way that didn't try to save them, because you knew that healing can't be forced. You didn't become their savior. You stayed their mirror. You showed honesty, calmness, and emotional depth. You let them see themselves in how you treated them, without telling them what to do or making them feel bad about it. That is a holy way to love. Heaven was shocked because that kind of love is usually only found in higher places, but you still carried it in a human body. You balanced feelings with wisdom, love with awareness, and hope with reality. You were chosen, my dear soul, because you knew that love doesn't mean losing yourself. You knew that love doesn't mean putting up with disrespect or giving up your peace. When times came that made you question your worth, you stepped back with grace. You didn't fall apart. You didn't chase. You didn't make things worse. You believed that what is aligned will never make you give up your soul. That kind of trust is hard to find. That trust is very important. That trust is what brought heaven closer to your story. You might not know it yet, but the way you love changed the course of time and made people more open. It made people more aware in places that were once closed off. Even if your soulmate didn't fully understand your love at the time, their soul did. Souls always know what is true, even when the mind is confused. Your love became a point of reference, a standard. and a quiet memory that they will keep until they are ready to love with the same depth. Heaven wasn't surprised by love, it was surprised by duty. You loved without being selfish, without trying to impress anyone, and without being afraid of losing yourself. My dear soul, your journey isn't about showing love, it's about living it. You were never meant to beg to be chosen. You were already chosen by God to experience love in its purest form. Your soul will not feel regret no matter what happens next on your path. You did what you came here to do. You loved with honesty, awareness, and bravery, and heaven respects that. This is just the start of your story. Chosen people don't lose love, they make it stronger, and as we go on, you'll start to see why your heart was trained through patience, why your silence had power, and why heaven trusted you with a love that not many people can handle. My dear soul, there is something holy about how you kept loving even when you weren't sure, and heaven watched that space very closely. You were in a place where many people would have wanted clear answers, labels, or comfort, but you chose to understand instead of feeling pressured. You knew that true love doesn't rush someone else's awakening, and you respected timing even when your own heart was ready long before things were right. That patience wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of wisdom that came from knowing yourself. You knew that trying to force love only makes things worse, but letting love in makes things real. Heaven saw you balance your desire with your dignity, your hope with your grounding, and your longing with your restraint. That balance is what made you special. You felt a lot, my dear soul, but you never let your feelings get out of hand. You looked inside yourself instead of outside when things got confusing. You thought about it instead of acting on it. Instead of showing pain, you processed it in silence. That kind of inner strength is rare because most people let their wounds show on other people. You took care of yours. You didn't use love to get what you wanted or silence to punish someone. Your silence was a holy way to listen to both your heart and the divine. Heaven saw that silence as strength, not lack. At times, your heart wanted to ask, explain, and make clear what you felt so strongly inside. But something higher told you to stop. You thought that if a connection is real, you don't have to keep explaining it. You believe that what is meant will find its way without force. It wasn't easy to trust that. It was built on self-esteem, emotional maturity, and a deep understanding of your own value. You didn't mix up closeness with intensity. You knew that safety, not urgency, makes intimacy grow. Heaven saw how you kept the connection strong by not letting it get too big. You also kept yourself safe. My dear soul, that is what made your love so strong. You didn't put up with emotional ups and downs just to stay in touch. You didn't give up your values to be chosen. You saw patterns. You saw how people acted. Instead of making excuses, you listened to energy. And when something didn't feel right, you didn't try to fix it. You stepped back. That stepping back wasn't saying no. It was showing respect for both yourself and the other person's process. Heaven honors those who know when to let go and when to hold on. You knew that love can't grow where fear leads, so you chose to become grounded and to be yourself without hiding behind a mask. You didn't play games to get people's attention. You didn't hold back your love to get what you wanted. You stayed the same even when the other side changed. Heaven was shocked by that consistency, because it takes emotional stability to be consistent in love, and it takes inner healing to be emotionally stable. You did the work quietly, without any praise or need to be seen. My dear soul, you loved in a way that let the other person be themselves. You didn't make them seem better than they really were. You didn't put them on a pedestal that would fall over later. You saw both light and dark, but you still chose to be kind. You knew that being confused doesn't always mean you don't feel anything. Sometimes it means you have wounds that haven't healed yet, but you also knew that being kind doesn't mean ignoring yourself. That knowledge is advanced soul wisdom. Heaven only gives this kind of wisdom to people who won't abuse it. Some days, being far away felt worse than being close. Even when unanswered energy made you wonder, you didn't spiral. You didn't think. You made room for the truth to come out. You let time speak. You believed that everything that was real would stay and everything that wasn't would go away on its own. Most people only reach that level of emotional control after many lives. You carried it without thinking, as if your soul remembered it. Heaven remembered that. You never tried to change who you are to stay relevant. You never turned down your light so that other people's shadows wouldn't scare you. You stayed true to yourself, grounded, intuitive, and emotionally smart. You didn't look for comfort because you had already given it to yourself. You didn't beg to be picked because you already knew how much you were worth. That self-awareness made a frequency that heaven can hear. A soul that knows itself doesn't need anyone else to tell it that it is. That is a sign that someone has been chosen to learn more about love. My dear soul, you didn't let bitterness into your heart. Even when love didn't feel complete, you didn't say anything bad. You didn't poison the relationship with anger. You chose to be neutral and graceful. You got that some connections shouldn't be forced into shape, but should be respected for what they bring out in you. You respected the lessons without worrying about what would happen next. That surrender moved heaven. Giving up is not surrendering. It is trusting that God has a plan that we can't understand. You loved your soulmate in a way that let them change, not depend on you. You wanted them to be whole, not attached. You wanted them to get better, not depend on you. That intention alone makes a connection more than just a romance. It turns into work on the soul. It turns into spiritual alignment. Heaven saw your love as a service, not a sacrifice. You didn't lose yourself in love. You grew because of it. That's why your path is safe. The ripples you make will stay, even if you don't know what they mean. Heaven wasn't surprised by your feelings. It was surprised by how smart you were about them. It was shocked by how well you could love without losing your mind. It was shocked that you wouldn't give up your own life for attachment. Keep this in mind as you move forward. Your love was not unnoticed, and your story is still going on, but the full meaning of what you carried is just starting to come to light. Chosen ones do not experience love to be broken by it. They experience love to become more aligned with who they truly are. My dear soul, there is a quiet change that happens when you stop waiting for love and start carrying it with you. You didn't even know when the change started when you stepped into it. It began the moment you stopped asking why things happened the way they did, started paying attention to what was happening inside of you. Love didn't leave you. It just changed shape, and you were grown up enough to let it happen without fighting it. When love changes, a lot of hearts get scared, but yours learned how to stay open without holding on. That ability alone shows that this person has lived many lives, and learned how to love without losing themselves. You started to notice that your feelings weren't making you do crazy things anymore. You could remember without falling apart. You could feel without going under. You could care without going after them. My dear soul, this balance was not a mistake. It was grown by holding back, thinking about things, and being honest with oneself. You let yourself be sad about what you didn't know without calling it a failure. You let yourself miss without feeling like you were betraying yourself. The world doesn't teach that. That wisdom comes from inside. From a soul that knows timing better than attachment. There were times when silence took the place of talking, and instead of being afraid of it, you learned how to read it. You knew that silence isn't always the same as absence. Sometimes it's a mirror that shows what words can't. You didn't make any guesses about the silence. You didn't use resentment as a weapon. You just watched it, and that made you stronger. You became someone who listens, being sound, and responds instead of reacting. My dear soul, you also learned how much you value emotional safety. You know that love shouldn't make your body feel anxious. It should feel stable, not shaky. And when something kept bothering you, you didn't ignore it anymore. You honored it. You didn't make a big deal out of your limits. You didn't tell anyone you were leaving. You just changed your energy. That quiet change showed that you respect yourself. And one of the most pure forms of love is self-respect. You started to see clearly how much work you had done without ever keeping track. You loved without thinking about what you would get back. You came without any promises, but you didn't feel tired. Instead, you felt bigger. That was how you knew your love was real. True love does not drain the soul, it unveils it. Real love leaves behind wisdom, not bitterness, even when the end is uncertain. And every time you chose wisdom, there were times when you talked to yourself that no one else will ever know about. These were times when you decided not to text, not to explain, or to be patient instead of acting on impulse. Those moments made your inner authority stronger. You stopped asking for permission to feel what you felt. You stopped doubting your gut feelings. You had faith in yourself, and that faith kept you grounded. My dear soul, you also know that not every deep connection is meant to stay the same forever. Some connections bring out parts of you that need to grow on their own. You didn't see this as a loss. You saw it as growth. You let love teach you instead of holding you back. You let memory beat without making it into desire. You let the heart stay soft without getting attached. That is the magic of emotions. You were more present in your own life. You laughed without feeling bad. You slept without worry. You were able to focus without being distracted. You stopped checking on how other people were feeling and started honoring how you were feeling. That change gave you back your power, and not power over other people, but power over yourself. That is the only power that lasts. My dear soul, you learned that just because you are chosen doesn't mean you will be held. Sometimes it means being ready to love better, ready to see things more clearly. and ready to accept what fits you instead of what tests you. You stopped romanticizing work that wasn't being done at the same level. You stopped calling what was really inconsistency potential. This clarity didn't make you cold. It made you feel better. You also saw that compassion and limits can work together. You could understand what was wrong with someone without giving them a place to bleed. You could care without having to carry. You could feel for someone without taking in. That is a sign of emotional growth that not many people achieve. You no longer thought that empathy meant doing something. You knew that love needs to be mutual in order to last. There were times when the memory of how much you loved would come back to you, not to pull you back, but to remind you of what you could do. Instead of hurting, you smiled. You weren't sorry. You were proud. You understood that there was nothing wrong with how you loved. It showed how deep, brave, and emotionally smart you were, no matter if they know it or not. Everyone who meets you carries that mark. My dear soul, you also got used to not knowing how the story ends. You stopped making things end. You no longer needed certainty. You believed that clarity would come to you on its own if you stopped looking for it. This surrender was not weak. It was strong. You kept living fully, loving yourself on purpose, and staying true to your values. You didn't stop living while you waited for someone else to make a choice. You learned that your heart is strong, not weak. It bends, but it doesn't break. It feels, but it doesn't break. It loves, but it doesn't go away. That made you see yourself differently. You aren't afraid to love deeply anymore, because you know you can handle whatever happens. My dear soul, the way you honored this connection without holding onto it, the way you honored yourself without shutting down everything about you made you someone who lives from a place of wholeness. You are no longer defined by what was unclear. You are defined by who you became as a result, and that version of you is stable, aware, and in tune with everything. This love didn't kill you. It made you better, and that's why your path keeps going with grace, because hearts like yours aren't meant to lose love. They're meant to change because of it and move forward stronger, clearer, and more rooted in truth. My dear soul, as you walked on, something small but strong began to happen inside you. You stopped having to explain things. You no longer felt the need to explain your feelings, your pace, or your limits. You knew that people who really see you don't need to keep asking for clarification, and people who don't see you would misunderstand even your best explanations. This realization gave you more energy. You didn't waste any more emotional energy trying to be understood. You decided to stay true to yourself, and grounded in your truth instead. You noticed that your inner world got quieter, not empty, but settled. My mind was no longer racing all the time. Emotions didn't need to be let out right away anymore. Things started to move in a natural way. My dear soul, this was not detachment. It was regulation. You learned how to sit quietly with yourself. You learned how to feel things without having to do anything. That quiet became your safe place. Your perception got sharper from that safe place. You started to notice patterns, not just in other people but also in yourself. You were aware of what made you angry and what calmed you down. You saw what made you tired and what made you feel better. You stopped putting up with pain just to stay connected. You stopped ignoring what your body was telling you to keep the peace on the outside. You picked peace of mind instead. That choice completely changed how you deal with love. You also understood how deeply you had honored the other person's humanity. My dear soul, you never asked for perfection. You never thought they would come completely healed. You met them where they were, without judging them or putting pressure on them. But now you knew something important. Meeting someone where they are doesn't mean staying there if it means you can't grow. You learned that love can be kind without giving up everything. The lesson came to me slowly. You became comfortable with giving space without worrying about being left behind. Space didn't feel like rejection anymore. It felt like understanding. It gave you space to breathe and get back on track. You stopped worrying about things that didn't matter. You stopped thinking that distance meant you didn't care. You let the truth speak for itself. And by doing this, you got back to being emotionally neutral. Being neutral is strong because it gets rid of illusions. It shows things as they are, not how you want them to be. There were times when your heart knew how much you had grown because of this relationship. You didn't feel smaller for loving deeply. You felt bigger. You felt smarter. You felt more in touch with your emotional needs. You no longer thought of depth as intensity. You no longer thought that wanting someone was the same as being close to them. You knew that depth feels safe, not scary. That realization quietly but firmly changed your standards. My dear, you also stopped making emotional pain seem romantic. You don't think that love has to hurt to be real anymore. You don't think that being patient means putting up with things that aren't always the same. You knew that real patience means being patient with yourself, which means being patient enough to walk away from things that confuse you and wait for things that feed. This knowledge made me feel better. Love started to feel like something that helps your nervous system instead of making it worse. You became more picky about where you put your emotional energy, not because you shut your heart, but because you cared about it. You learned that being available is important. You learned that not everyone should be able to get to your depth. You learned that discernment is not the same as judgment. It is the same as self-respect, and having respect for yourself made you more present, more grounded, and more calm. My dear soul, you also let go of the need to show how much you love me. You didn't need to be validated anymore. You knew what you were selling. You knew how you looked. You knew your motives were good. That knowledge brought you peace. You stopped going over things in your head. You stopped wondering if you did too much or not enough. You were sure that you got what you were supposed to get, and you never had to force anything that wasn't ready to be received. You learned that your energy can affect other people even when you're not talking. You learned that your calm presence speaks louder than words, that your emotional steadiness makes people feel safe, and that your consistency leaves a lasting impression. You didn't need to say how much you were worth. People could tell. Knowing this did not make you feel better about yourself. It made you feel worse. It reminded you to remain gentle with yourself and others. There were times when the thought of the connection resurfaced softly without pain. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement rather than longing. You smiled instead of sighing. You felt gratitude instead of ache. You understood that some connections do not stay physically present, yet they leave a permanent imprint on your growth. That imprint was not a wound. It was a marker of evolution. My beloved soul, you also became less reactive to uncertainty. You no longer needed immediate answers. You no longer chased clarity. You trusted that clarity reveals itself when you stopped demanding it. This trust allowed you to remain present in your life. You invested in yourself, nurtured your routines, and strengthened your inner foundation. Love became something that complements your life, not something that defies it. You noticed how your emotional world felt more spacious. You could hold multiple truths at once. You could acknowledge connection without attachment. You could care without expectation. You could remember without longing. This emotional spaciousness allowed you to breathe more freely. It allowed you to live without the constant pull of what if. You were grounded in what is. My beloved soul, you understood that being chosen does not always look like union. Sometimes it looks like preparation. Preparation to receive love that meets you where you are now, not where you were. Preparation to recognize consistency when it appears. Preparation to honor mutual effort without overextending. You did not rush this preparation. You trusted it. You continued walking forward with a heart that remained open yet protected.